Let's continue the drafting process from where we left off in the last video. Let's continue to finish the center and side panels of our front yoke. These are the pieces that we cut in our last video. Now let's start by cutting off the dart intake on the side panel. The link to the previous video is given in the description box below. After cutting the dart intake, this becomes the princess line for the yoke. Mark the dart point on both the panels. When the princess lines are traced together like this, the length of both the princess line must be the same. Check if the princess lines measure the same on both the panels before adding the seam allowance to the panels. The length of the princess lines measure the same. So let's continue to the next step. Take another piece of paper and fold for about 1 to 1.5 inches. This is the center front of our front yoke pattern. Now place the center panel and side panel on this paper. Align the center panel with the on-fold line of the paper. Trace the center panel to the new paper as shown here. Remember to trace the dart point to the new paper. Since we are matching the on-fold lines of both the paper patterns, the grain line will remain the same. But when we are tracing the side panel, it is important to trace the side panel according to the grain line. So I am going to mark the grain lines on the patterns here. It's easy to find the grain line of the side panel because of the square neckline. So I am trying to keep the square neckline parallel to the on-fold line. Start tracing the side panel. Remember to trace the bust point along the princess line. Let's do an important step here. We are going to reduce the shoulder slope slightly for the front on the neck side. So if this is our shoulder line, I am going to reduce the shoulder slope by 1/4 inches by marking 1/4 inches on the neckline side. Why am I doing this? This step is important to make sure that the shoulder line fits well on the shoulders without lifting on the neckline side. Measure the shoulder line to check if it measures 3 inches. Now let's start adding the seam allowances. 1/4 inch on the neckline, 1 centimeter on the princess line, 1/2 inch on the waistline, 1/2 inch on the armhole, and 1 1/4 or 1.5 inches for the side seam. Repeat the same for the side panel. Before adding the side seam allowance, it is better to check the side seam length from the back pattern and check if the side seam length measures the same on our front pattern as well. You can follow the same steps I am showing here. After checking, proceed with adding the seam allowance to the pattern. Place the back pattern over the front pattern and check if both the side seams measure the same along with the seam allowance. This step will avoid any mismatch between the side seams while sewing. Continue marking the seam allowance on the princess line. Now mark the grain line of the side panel parallel to the on-fold of the paper. Start cutting the center panel and the side panel. We have the front yoke panels ready as well as the back yoke ready. Now let's check if the shoulders and the armhole line are blended and perfectly matching with one another. It's very easy to check. Fold the seam allowance on both the shoulders. Place the shoulder line together like this and see if there is any mismatch. Here, if you see, there is a slight mismatch on the armhole side. Now your question will be whether to trim off this excess bit. No, if we trim off this excess bit, then we will have a shortage of shoulders on the back side. So we are going to paste a small piece of paper to the front pattern and try to blend both the armholes together. This is bound to happen when we do sleeveless dresses. It is always essential to check the shoulder line before proceeding to cut them on the fabric. You can follow the steps that I am going to show you now if your shoulder lines are mismatching with one another. Stick a piece of paper on the armhole side of the side panel. Now place the back pattern aligning the shoulders together. Start drawing the new armhole line, blending in with the back armhole line. Extend the shoulder line and shape the armhole on the front pattern as shown here. And now let's cut the new pattern. Once again, let's check the shoulder line. Now the shoulder lines are matching perfectly with one another and it blends smoothly into the neckline as well as the armhole side line. The back pattern is ready as well as the front, center panel and the side panels are ready to be placed on the fabric and cut. The next important paper pattern that we need is the front neckline facing pattern. Our princess line is going to run from the neckline to the waistline. Place the seamless working pattern onto a piece of paper that is on fold. Now trace the front neckline from the paper pattern. Now remember to cross that 1/4 inches of shoulder line that we did for the front pattern. After drawing the new shoulder line, add seam allowance to the shoulder line, neckline side as well as the width of the facing. Name the pattern, draw the grain line of the facing and cut the facing pattern. Next step is to lay the paper patterns on the fabric and cut. I have cut out the skirt part already from the fabric, so I am using the leftover fabrics to cut the yoke part. Lay the fabric on fold on the lengthwise direction, that is parallel to the selvage. Now place the patterns and check if the width of the on fold is enough to cut the back pattern. Adjust the width of the fabric to accommodate the back pattern. The yoke part is going to be lined with cotton fabric. So I am going to lay the cotton fabric aligning the on folds of both the fabrics together. Now place the back pattern aligning the on folds of the fabric. Pin all the layers together as shown here. Place the side panel of the front yoke aligning the grain line with the on fold of the fabric. Pin the pattern to the layers of fabric. Now start cutting the back pattern as well as the front side panel pattern. The patterns are cut and ready. Let's keep them aside. We still have to cut the center front panel. So again let's lay the fabric on fold in the lengthwise direction. Place the lining fabric on fold aligning with the main fabric. Place the center front panel and pin the layers of fabric together. Start cutting the fabric. Next step is to place the front facing on fold as shown here and cut the neckline facing. Now give a notch against the bust point on the center front panel and the side panel. These notches help us while tailoring the princess line together. We can always match the dart points together and stitch the princess lines together. Now notch the side seam line. And let's notch the shoulder line. Let's notch the shoulder line on the back pattern. Now let's notch the dart line on the back pattern. Use a pin to transfer the dart point to the fabrics. This is the end of part 2 video. In the part 3 video, let's see how to draft and cut the skirt part of this beautiful dress.